Thank you, Burjin Hanem. First of all, I'd like to thank the audience for having turned out as many of you as you have. I think Burjin was telling me that over 180 people came to the workshop, to the forum today, which is beyond what we expected initially. And second, I'd like to thank the mayor, Natasha and Balas, the EU, for being here and opening the forum, and for their support, including the CTF and the EU for their economic support to run our programs. And third, I'd like to thank Burçin, Hanem, and Denise for their titanic efforts in organizing this forum, which wouldn't have not been possible without them. So thank you very much. I'll briefly, I'll be very, very quick because I know you all must be quite tired by now and quite overloaded with slides. But I'll briefly try to answer three points. I'll divide my slides into three items. First of all, why is EBRD involved in geothermal, and why is EBRD involved in a forum like this? Second, what do we think the status of geothermal is and the future prospects for the technology and the sector in Turkey? And how do we see the challenges and opportunities of the sector and the rationale to organize an event like this, bringing together international experts together with local experts and trying to share information and best practices to further support the sector going forward. So why are we involved? As most of you might know, but maybe of you are not so familiar, the EBRD created in 1991 was created in 1991 as a development bank to support the transition to market economies in the former Soviet Union countries. We started operating in Turkey in 2009, and since then, Turkey became our first country of operations. We invest about 2 billion euros every year in Turkey, of which 50% relates to sustainable energy, which is a very, very large portion, the largest in all our countries of operations. And we are based on three principles. One is the transition impact, that is, we support markets to transition from planned economies to fully developed market economies. The second is the first one is sound banking, actually. We support commercially viable investments. And the third one is additionality. We do not compete with the local players, but we complement with them, and that's how we've been operating with banks like Garanti, which is kindly represented by Ahmed Bey here today. How have we worked? How have we supported the sector globally and in Turkey? In 1997, we had our first geothermal experience in Kamchatka, but since then we didn't finance any geothermal power plant until we started operating in Turkey. And since then, as Natasha mentioned, we financed 7 plants, 6 of which have been through local commercial banks, and one of which has been the largest geothermal plant in Turkey, has been financed directly together with other local banks. And that's how we've acquired our geothermal experience, which is relatively recent but quite enthusiastic, if you want. Since we started financing geothermal, we've been quite enthusiastically engaged in the sector. And how we do so, not only we provide financing through direct loans or on lending to local banks, but we also mobilize climate finance in order to actually tackle the existing barriers that the sector might have. And this is a key point, the climate finance, to connect with the issues, the environmental issues that geothermal might have. And you will hear me speaking about the non-condensable gases and how we need to actually address this issue in order to be able to mobilize additional climate finance and leverage commercial funds based on those. Together with that, we also provide technical assistance to developers in applying best practices in their development, and that has been incorporated in our programs, and we will be further elaborating on the Pluto program tomorrow. Not today, but tomorrow. I wanted to keep the slides today to a general aspects. And third, and very importantly as well, we work with the government in improving the regulatory framework to support investments in renewables, and specifically in geothermal until now. We helped the Ministry of Energy put together the first National Renewable Energy Action Plan for Turkey, which actually reviewed the target for geothermal up to 1 gigawatt that we all think that will be overachieved by the deadline, which is 2023. So based on that, what do we think the geothermal context in Turkey is, and how do we see it going forward? As you all know, until April, there was around 650 megawatts of installed capacity. Today, Ali Bey from NTA shared with us that the current installed capacity is 697 which is outstanding, especially because, thanks to that, Turkey has actually advanced Iceland in actual installed capacity in the country, which is a few years ago that would have been unthinkable, if you want, right? Being larger than Iceland in terms of absolute numbers would have been a surprise. In recent years, for the last 5 years, Turkey has multiplied by 6, around 6, the installed capacity in the country, mostly in Western Anatolia. But what we see going forward, what we hope to support going forward, is the development of new geothermal capacity in Central and Eastern Anatolia, as you can see in the arrows you see here. And we expect to support that additional capacity expansion through our Pluto program that we'll present tomorrow. What are the key challenges for geothermal development in Turkey? Well, financing is certainly one of them. You've seen this graph, especially the one that you can see on the right-hand corner, very often, that plots risks versus cost at every stage of geothermal development. If we actually multiply both values, we get the value at risk, which is actually the amount of money that we could lose at every stage. We see that the drilling stage and the power plant development are still the highest, but the test drilling, the exploratory drilling, is still a very significant phase. Currently, through local banks, through commercial financing, one can achieve financing for power plant development and also for the latest stage of the drilling phase. And you would get exactly the same support from our side. I think our colleagues from Garanti, from İçin, would not be stepping further down into the project development or earlier into the project development, and we wouldn't either, except for the fact that we actually manage to mobilize clean technology funds to actually support and take risk of the early stage development. And that's what I mentioned before. The Pluto program was put forward exactly to support many of you in developing your projects and applying best practices. This is a kind of a breakdown of the costs of early stage development. What we would expect with Pluto is the developers take care of the top side of the pyramid until the exploratory drilling or wildcat well drilling takes place. So basically, take the early stage burden of the exploration phase, and once the costs become more cumbersome for the developers, we would be stepping in and sharing the financial and the technical risks of the geothermal development. And finally, what do we think are the key challenges and key opportunities for geothermal development in Turkey? Well, certainly, as you know, most of the geothermal power plants, I think around 90% of the installed capacity, is based on the north rim of the Buyukmenderesgraben, which is a very prolific area, but will have a limit. So certainly, the coordination among project operators is key to actually sustainably manage the geothermal resources going forward. And clearly, overexploitation of the resources is a significant risk, and that's what happened in some of the areas and the fields around the world. And that's why we brought an expert from Calpine actually to share their experience in the geysers. And certainly full reinjection of resources, as Izbey, the mayor of Izmir, mentioned, and resource monitoring will be key going forward in order to make sure that geothermal power is sustainably managed and sustainably expanded going forward. And those are the reasons why we actually started collaborating with Enerchange and Think Geoenergy in bringing together experts today and tomorrow, because we wanted to actually tackle the technical aspects, the challenges and technical aspects of those challenges through this experts meeting, if you want. And that's why the forum is divided as such. We divided the forum in the form of sustainable resource management sustainable management of resources, drilling and exploration, pumps and water loop, and power plant technology, as well as secondary uses to further generate value of the projects. And actually, that's particularly important, as I'll mention in my last slide. In terms of the NCGs, the non-condensable gases, this is an issue, as I said, because we want to promote this technology as a green technology, as a nearly zero emissions technology. And what takes place in some of the areas of the Western Anatolia is that the level of emissions is quite significant, even though it declines with time. For this, we've devised 4 different strategies to actually assess and reduce CO2 emissions from plants. One is actually to measure the baseline before the plant operates and after the plant operates, and actually net the hopefully decline in CO2 emissions due to plant operations. That's one step that we would like to take forward. We will be measuring CO2 emissions in some of the sites we support, together with understanding how the emissions progress a long time. And this is part of some work we did with Serhat Bey from the Middle East Technical University on how the concentration of NCGs decline over time, over 6 years, in the production of one of the main geothermal power plants in Turkey. This will be published in a paper because it's worthwhile looking into the data. And we did some regression analysis in order to actually fit the data into a curve that fitted actually quite reasonably well. The third approach would be to use the CO2 for industrial uses, and that's part of the study that we also we did with Serhat Bey. The idea is actually to use it for agricultural purposes, to increase the yield of output, of tomatoes, of whatever agricultural product is put forward, and there will be one of the speakers that will speak about the use of geothermal heat and geothermal CO2 in order to produce actually tomatoes. But also fertilizer production and enhanced oil recovery could be potentially uses of CO2 in order to further reduce the net emissions. And finally, reinjection options. So we believe that by combining all 4 approaches, we'll be able to actually reduce the final emissions or emission factor of the plants. And what are the opportunities? As I said before, there are additional opportunities, that those challenges that I spoke about, especially the challenge of the NCGs, could be turned into an opportunity by monetizing those CO2 emissions. And there are many other potential uses. I think Aziz Bey mentioned healthcare and recreation. In fact, if recently Jill and I and some of the other people in the room were recently in the Icelandic Geothermal Conference. And it was very interesting to see how the Icelandic have been able to monetize geothermal resources, not only for power production, not only for district heating, but also for agricultural production. They have greenhouses in an area that most of the year has below 0 temperatures. Dry fishing facilities, also recreational activities. In fact, doing a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and that's something we were discussing with some colleagues back in Iceland, the Svartsegi, I think it's called Svartsegi Geothermal Power Plant, is the power plant where the Blue Lagoon is based. It's a 76 megawatt power plant. Every entrance to the Blue Lagoon is charged at least 50 euro per person. There's 1 million visitors to the Blue Lagoon per year, and they at least pay those 50 euros, and they pay even more for different kind of products. If you do a back-of-the-envelope calculation, you will see that the HS Orca, which is the operator of the plant, the owner of the plant, actually is getting more money from the Blue Lagoon than from the power plant selling power. And that's something that could be clearly transferable to Turkey. And given the vibrancy of the public sector, I'm sure there will be many opportunities to actually take advantage of those geothermal resources. Again, district heating is another potential use of geothermal, together with agricultural use. And I think, without further ado, I would like to close all the sessions. And I think opening the floor to questions and answers would make a lot of sense, because I'm sure a lot of you have many comments to make and many interventions to make. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.